I want to talk about these wonderfully rich readings that we have this morning. We have the story from the Gospel of Luke about the road to Emmaus, and there is so much that is in that story for us. I can't recall which biblical commentator who one time wrote, the phrase is always stuck in my head, that he thinks that road to Emmaus story is the most sophisticated of all the stories in the New Testament. There's so many layers in that story. But I also want to talk about that Acts reading, because there are some important things that go on in the book of Acts that are a window into the early church, where the early church folks, their thinking was at in terms of understanding what the resurrection of Jesus meant, who this Jesus was, that I think we have missed a bit in our day. It is highlighted by a hymn that's a very popular hymn. The hymn is How Great Thou Art. And it's a hymn that often people request, and often people will request at funerals and things like that. But anytime that hymn is requested, there's a verse in it that I always ask, could we ditch that one, please? And I know Glen and I have talked, Glen's always happy to omit this one hymn, or this one verse out of this hymn. It is absolutely hideous theology. And so it's some fine lines and lines that get crossed. But when I think that God, his Son not sparing, sent him to die, I scarce can take it in, that on the cross my burden gladly bearing, he bled and died to take away my sin. It's this idea that God sent Jesus to us for one solitary purpose, and that was for Jesus to die on the cross. That theological view is a relatively recent development in 2,000 years of Christian history. Now, some people might be thinking, like, what do you mean? Because it's almost like the default setting out in the culture. But here's what I want to contrast it to you, and then I'll explain a bit about how this matters and why it matters. If you go through the book of Acts and then read through the epistles, over and over again, when Peter preaches, 5-6 times or so, as recorded in the book of Acts, here's the formula and the order in which things go. He talks about this Jesus. He says to the crowd gathered, "You crucified him, but God raised him up." So do you see the death, the violence, the murdering is on us, not on God. It's on us. Peter uses that formula, that pattern, over and over again. You crucified him. God raised him up. There's an author who's written a book, and he packs a lot into. His name is Andre Robb. And let me read to you a couple of paragraphs out of his book. I think he puts this so very clearly. The name of his book is God's Judgment on Jesus. Humankind's judgment of Jesus results in his death. God's judgment of Jesus results in his resurrection. God vindicates the message and person of Jesus by raising him from the dead and exalting him to a place of unparalleled honor. We have often ascribed, so that's all of us, we have often ascribed both the good and the evil of the cross to God. Let's expose that myth. God obviously anticipated these events. He knew that the open display of truth in a world bound by myth would be a confrontation with only one possible result. The very fabric upon which our societies were built, the false accusation, the prince of this world, the father of lies, would not take to this exposure kindly. Yes, God knew and planned to make the most of this confrontation, but in no way is he the source of the violence that it exposes. In no way does he delight in the suffering and death of Jesus Christ. Whenever the apostles speak about the death and resurrection of Christ, they assign responsibility for the two events to two different parties. And then he goes through all of the book of Acts. And you see, what happens is we rarely sort of pick these texts apart and chart out all of the sermons that Peter preaches in the book of Acts. And you'll see that pattern over and over and over again. Here's a part of how it matters. And it comes down to that issue of why was Jesus crucified? And if we just slough all the responsibility off to God and say, oh, well, this is what God planned from the beginning of time, and so it's nothing really. I mean, there was the resurrection after all. It gets us off scot-free. It disconnects us entirely from the events of Maundy Thursday, the events of Good Friday. It just gets us off the hook. Here's a different way of looking at that crucifixion event. Who drove those nails through his precious hands? I did. All of us did. How do we do that? I have done that every time I have walked past a hungry person who has begged of me, or someone who is thirsty and I refuse to give them drink, or someone who is naked and I refuse to give them clothes. There are so many ways in our day-to-day lives that we participate, you see, in what sent Jesus to the cross. There's another word that's very popular these days. You probably all heard it, and especially in some wings of the church, apocalypse, right? End times and apocalypse and all this stuff. The Greek word apocalypse, it means unveiling. So that, for instance, when we go to set the altar and I take the veil off the chalice, I am apocalypting the chalice to you. It's a revealing, an unveiling, so that something is revealed to you. The crucifixion of Jesus was apocalyptic in that it exposed to us, it unveiled to us what we are capable of. As I mentioned back around Easter Sunday, if you think about all of the processes that they put Jesus through, the judicial process, the political processes, the religious authorities, his trial, all of that, it was all done lawfully and legally. And it was exposed to us when the centurion, I think best articulated by the centurion at the foot of the cross, when he looks up, when Jesus gives up his spirit, and he says, truly, this man was the Son of God. And what that does for us is say, I need to avoid group think. Because do you remember the same crowd that on Palm Sunday is saying, oh, Hosanna to the Son of David, Hosanna, and praising and throwing their coats, and the same people 5 days later crucify him. You remember, you saw some of that in the gospel reading this morning, right? When those two disciples are saying, well, we thought he was the one who was going to redeem Israel, and look what happened. They had that thinking. That's what was supposed. He was supposed to put together the troops. He wasn't supposed to go to a cross, die on a cross. So it exposed to us what human societies and us as participants in it are capable of. When we scapegoat people, when we easily just go with the flow and in group thinking and herd mentality, it exposed to us the cost of that. And Easter Sunday is God vindicating what Jesus taught us, what he modeled for us, the words he spoke to us, to say, no, you crucified him like a criminal. He was God's own Son, the most perfect revelation of God's will, God's heart, God's desire for us, God's hopes and dreams for us. Jesus is the perfect encapsulation, revelation of all of that for us. So we do that not to beat ourselves up and say, oh yeah, what a miserable so-and-so, oh my God, I crucified Jesus. It's not about that, beating ourselves up and feeling horrible about ourselves. It is for us to see through the lies that our society tells us and tries to convince us of. It's that, but it's also to lead us on to becoming better and better and better people, right? We say, okay, how is it? What are the things I do in my life where I participate in that sort of violence that led Jesus to the cross? So then how do I avoid those things in my life? How do I live a better discipleship following this Jesus? And some of the answer to that is in that story about the road to Emmaus. So on one hand, the road to Emmaus story, it's obvious to see how that is a model for communion and what we do at Eucharist. You know, they sit down in the breaking of bread, they recognize Jesus. But if we sort of go at that story carefully and look at the little elements of it, Jesus took bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it away. Is that not also a model of his very life to us and for us? He was a blessing to us. His body was broken for us. And his love, his heart, his will was given away in service to others. And that story is a model for us as disciples of Jesus as well, that we recognize all the blessings that surround us, that our very life, our breath is a blessing from God. But we live in a world, as I say, where we're bombarded with all of these other messages trying to draw us away from our faithfulness to God. And so we get centered in God, and it's going to sometimes feel even like our very body is broken as we try to get centered in God. That is because things like ego and me, and I want, as Paul puts it, all of that old self, it has to go. It has to go. And for some people that's easy, for some people that's very, very tough. We take our life, we allow our lives to get broken. That is sacrificial service to other people. Service to other people that costs us, and sometimes costs us dearly. And I'm not talking about your bank account, right? It's not when I say costs us. We automatically sort of think like it's a financial exchange. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm saying sacrificial service to other people that costs us, and we give it away. And here's the paradox to that, is that Christian love is the one, I'll say, commodity that when we give it away, it grows. We increase in it. We don't lose. We grow bigger and better and stronger and deeper and broader when we give our Christian love away. And so that's how this issue about the cross and the message of the early church, because it surrounds us everywhere. It's been with us for a few hundred years now, this idea of, what is it called? Penal substitutionary atonement theory. This idea that the only reason God sent Jesus was to die on the cross, but don't you worry about it. He had a plan all along anyway. And it's like, you gotta, it seems to me, look at some of the nuance of that. It is to inspire us and strengthen us so that we can spread that love out into the world with no obstacles. Amen.